Imagine this scenario for a second. Your favorite restaurant has the worst food in the entire city. Dead last. People are literally getting sick from eating there. Reviews are 1 star across the board. Health inspectors are concerned. So what does the owner do? Fire the head chef who's won 2 Chef of the Year awards and replace him with the guy who's been cooking that terrible food. Sounds absolutely insane, right? Well, welcome to the Cleveland Browns, where that exact scenario is about to play out in real life, except instead of food, it's football, and instead of a restaurant, it's one of the NFL's most dysfunctional franchises. Tommy Rees, a 33-year-old offensive coordinator whose unit just finished dead last in scoring across the entire league, 15.2 points per game, the worst offense in football, is reportedly being considered to replace Kevin Stefanski as the Browns' next head coach. And the craziest part? There's actually a legitimate reason why this could happen, and it all comes down to 3 words: Nick Saban endorsement. If you want to understand how the greatest college football coach of all time might convince the Browns to make the most Browns decision in franchise history, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is absolutely wild. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The Cleveland Browns just had the worst offense in the entire National Football League. Not second worst, not third worst, dead last. 32nd out of 32 teams. They averaged 15.2 points per game this season. To put that in perspective, the next worst offense, the New York Giants, averaged 17.9 points per game. The Browns were a full 2.7 points worse than the second worst offense in football. They were unwatchable, embarrassing, a complete and total disaster. And who was calling the plays for that offense? Who was designing the scheme, making the decisions, orchestrating the attack that made Cleveland the laughingstock of the league offensively? Tommy Rees, the 33-year-old offensive coordinator who, by every measurable metric, just presided over one of the worst offensive seasons in modern NFL history. Now, under normal circumstances, when your offense is that bad, the offensive coordinator gets fired. That's how the NFL works. You produce results or you're out. It's a brutal, cutthroat business where performance is everything and excuses mean nothing. So when Kevin Stefanski, a 2-time NFL Coach of the Year winner who led the Browns to the playoffs twice in 6 seasons, reportedly is getting fired after finishing 5-12, you'd think his offensive coordinator would be packing his bags right alongside him. Except that's not what's happening. Instead, multiple insider reports suggest that the Browns are actually considering promoting Tommy Rees from offensive coordinator to head coach. Yes, you read that correctly. The team might fire the 2-time Coach of the Year and replace him with the coordinator whose offense was the worst in football. Mary Kay Cabot, the most connected Browns insider in the business, dropped this absolute bombshell when she said promoting Rees to head coach is not out of the realm of possibility. She explained that if the Browns believe in what they've seen from Shedeur Sanders' development under Rees, if they think the offensive coordinator can continue building their young quarterback into a franchise player, they might just hand him the keys to the entire organization. And before you dismiss this as typical Cleveland dysfunction, which, let's be honest, it partially is, you need to understand why this insane idea even has legs. It all comes back to one man, arguably the greatest football coach who ever lived, Nick Saban. Tommy Rees spent 1 year as Alabama's offensive coordinator under Nick Saban during the 2023 season. And in that one season, Rees didn't just survive working for the most demanding, perfectionist coach in football history, he thrived. Alabama went 11 straight wins before losing to Michigan in the college football playoff semifinals. Quarterback Jalen Milroe went from being benched in Week 3 to finishing 6th in the Heisman Trophy voting. The offense that was debilitated and lacking identity, as ESPN described it, became dynamic and explosive under Rees's guidance. But here's what really matters. Nick Saban was impressed. deeply impressed. And when Nick Saban tells NFL teams to hire someone, when he puts his reputation behind a coach and says, "This guy is special," the entire football world listens. Because Saban doesn't do that for just anyone. He's coached hundreds of assistants over his legendary career. He's worked with offensive coordinators who went on to become college head coaches, NFL coordinators, position coaches across the country. But when Saban specifically endorses someone, when he goes out of his way to tell teams, "You should hire this person," that carries massive weight. And Saban has been pushing Tommy Rees hard. Multiple college programs interviewed Rees for head coaching positions specifically because Saban recommended him. Penn State wanted him as a finalist for their head coaching job. North Carolina tried to hire him away before they ultimately landed Bill Belichick. Every time a high-profile opening comes up, Rees's name gets mentioned, and Saban's endorsement is always part of the conversation. When Alabama needed to replace Saban after his retirement, Tommy Rees was actually considered for the job. A 33-year-old who'd been a coordinator for one season at Alabama was in the conversation to replace the GOAT. That's how highly Saban thought of him. The job ultimately went to Kalen DeBoer, but the fact that Rees was even in the discussion tells you everything you need to know about Saban's opinion of his former offensive coordinator. So, here's the Browns' calculation. They're terrified of losing Tommy Rees, absolutely panicked about it, because if they fire Kevin Stefanski and conduct a traditional head coaching search, interviewing Ben Johnson from Detroit, Mike Vrabel, who just left for New England, Aaron Glenn from the Lions, all the usual suspects, Tommy Rees is going to get poached. Some college program will offer him a head coaching job. Some NFL team will hire him as their offensive coordinator with actual talent to work with. And the Browns will lose the one coach who has Nick Saban's golden endorsement and the developmental skills to potentially fix their quarterback situation.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to understand who Tommy Rees actually is, because his story is absolutely fascinating and explains both why Saban loves him and why the Browns are even considering this insane move. Tommy Rees grew up in football royalty. His father, Bill Rees, was a longtime NFL scout and personnel executive who worked for UCLA, the San Diego Chargers, and multiple other organizations. Tommy literally grew up around the game, understanding X's and O's from the time he could walk. As a kid, he spent summers working as a ball boy for the Cleveland Browns, shagging kicks from Phil Dawson, folding towels, catching passes for quarterbacks. His introduction to professional football happened in Cleveland, which makes this potential return as head coach even more poetic. But Rees's playing career at Notre Dame is what really shaped him into the coach he is today, and it was brutal. Rees was a 4-year starting quarterback for the Fighting Irish from 2010 to 2013, finishing with a 23-8 record. He threw for over 7,000 yards and 61 touchdowns in his career. Those are solid numbers, but here's what you need to know. Rees was also called Tommy Turnover by Notre Dame fans because he threw 14 interceptions as a sophomore in 2011. He was booed by his own crowd. He was suspended for the first game of the 2012 season after an alcohol-related arrest at an off-campus party. His confidence was destroyed. His reputation was in tatters. And then something changed. In the second game of 2012, when starting quarterback Everett Golson got injured, boos literally rang out when Rees entered the game, but he led a game-winning drive to save Notre Dame that day. Then he came off the bench again to beat Michigan. Then he did it against Stanford. He spearheaded the Irish's path to the BCS National Championship game, where they got absolutely destroyed by, wait for it, Nick Saban and Alabama 42-14. That championship game was Rees's introduction to Saban. The young quarterback got picked apart by Saban's defense, thrown into the meat grinder of Alabama's defensive scheme, and thoroughly embarrassed on the biggest stage in college football. But Saban remembered him, remembered his toughness, remembered how he handled being booed by his own fans, and still came back to lead his team. Saban saw something in Rees even back then, a mental toughness, a resilience, a refusal to quit even when everything was going wrong.
After his playing career ended, he was signed as an undrafted free agent with Washington but never made an NFL roster. Rees immediately went into coaching. He started as a graduate assistant at Northwestern in 2015. 1 year. Then he spent 2016 as an offensive assistant for the San Diego Chargers, getting his first taste of NFL coaching. Then in 2017, he returned to Notre Dame as the quarterback's coach. And this is where Rees started building his reputation. Over 5 years at Notre Dame, he developed quarterbacks Ian Book, Brandon Wimbush, and Jack Cohn into high-level college players. Book finished as the winningest quarterback at Notre Dame history, with a 30-5 record as a starter. He took the Irish to 2 college football playoff appearances. Under Rees's coaching, the Notre Dame offense ranked 19th nationally in scoring in 2021, averaging 35.2 points per game. Rees was promoted to offensive coordinator in 2020 and spent 3 seasons running Notre Dame's offense. He was good at it. The offense was balanced, explosive, creative. He was named Football Scoop's Quarterbacks Coach of the Year in 2018. He was on the fast track to becoming a head coach somewhere. And then Nick Saban came calling. In February 2023, Saban hired Tommy Rees as Alabama's offensive coordinator, and eyebrows were raised across college football. Tommy was only 30 years old, the second youngest offensive coordinator in Saban's entire career. He had no ties to Alabama or the SEC. He'd never called plays in that conference, and Alabama was coming off a season where their offense had struggled, where Bryce Young left for the NFL, where quarterback play was a massive question mark. Critics wondered if Rees was ready, but here's what nobody understood at the time. Saban saw himself in Tommy Rees. One Alabama staff member said it perfectly. Tommy does a really good job of hearing the message and not necessarily the delivery, and a lot of guys crumble under that. Saban is notoriously demanding. He's brutal in meetings. He'll tear apart your play calls, question your decisions, challenge everything you do. Most coordinators can't handle it. They crack under the pressure. But Rees thrived. Why? Because he'd already been through hell at Notre Dame. He'd already been booed by his own fans. He'd already faced public humiliation and failure. He developed what he calls conviction, the ability to believe in your decisions even when someone as powerful as Nick Saban is questioning them. Rees would walk into meetings with Saban and defend his play calls. He'd explain why he wanted to run certain concepts. He'd stand his ground, and Saban loved it. Jack Cohn, who played quarterback for Rees at Notre Dame, described him this way. He wants to win so badly. He's so competitive, and he takes everything personal, whether it's going against the defense in practice or going against the defensive coordinator on a different team. Multiple people who know Rees well say he's almost a younger version of Saban, obsessively competitive, never satisfied, constantly pushing to improve. The results spoke for themselves. Alabama's offense was dynamic in 2023. Jalen Milroe developed into a Heisman candidate. The Crimson Tide won 11 straight games before falling to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. When Nick Saban announced his retirement in January 2024, Rees was actually considered as his replacement. A 31-year-old who'd been in Alabama for 1 year was in the conversation to take over the greatest dynasty in college football history. After Kalen DeBoer was hired instead, Rees found himself in a weird position. He'd only been at Alabama for 1 year. He had Saban's endorsement, but no clear path forward at the school. Multiple reports indicated that Rees consulted with Saban about his next move, and Saban encouraged him to take an NFL opportunity to continue developing his coaching skills. That's when Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns came calling. They offered Rees a position as pass game specialist and tight ends coach, a significant step down from being Alabama's offensive coordinator. But it was a chance to learn NFL coaching under Stefanski, who many consider one of the best offensive minds in football. It was a chance to get back to Cleveland, where he'd spent summers as a kid. And most importantly, it was a stepping stone to eventually becoming an NFL offensive coordinator.
Rees spent 2024 as Cleveland's tight ends coach, working alongside Mike Vrabel, who was a consultant with the Browns before leaving to become New England's head coach this week. Despite the offense being terrible, Stefanski praised Rees's work with the tight end group, saying he did a phenomenal job with that group and always had his players ready for game day, despite, in some cases, only being with the team for a short period of time. Then, when Stefanski fired offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey after the 2025 season finished with Cleveland posting the third lowest scoring offense in the league at 15.8 points per game, he promoted Tommy Rees to offensive coordinator. The thinking was simple. Rees had Nick Saban's endorsement, he'd successfully coordinated Alabama's offense, and he could help develop whichever quarterback the Browns decided to start in 2026. Except the 2026 season was an absolute disaster. Rees's offense finished dead last in the NFL in scoring, at 15.2 points per game. The Browns went through multiple quarterbacks. Joe Flacco started the year, then Dylan Gabriel got some starts, then Shedeur Sanders took over for the final few games. Jerry Jeudy, who'd been a Pro Bowl receiver the year before, struggled with drops. The offensive line couldn't protect. The play calling was inconsistent and often bizarre. It was arguably the worst offensive performance by any team in recent memory. And yet, despite all of that failure, despite the worst offense in football, despite finishing 5-12 and missing the playoffs for the second straight year, the Browns are reportedly considering promoting Tommy Rees to head coach. How? How does this make any sense? It all comes back to the Saban factor. The Browns are betting, gambling really, that Rees's failure in 2026 wasn't about his coaching ability, but about the roster. That if you give Rees actual talent to work with, if you fix the offensive line, if you get him legitimate weapons at receiver, if you give him a quarterback he can develop from the ground up, he'll be able to replicate what he did at Notre Dame and Alabama. And there's actually some evidence to support this theory. The 2026 Browns offense was working with nothing. Deshaun Watson's contract was still eating up cap space, even though he couldn't play. The offensive line was among the worst in the league. Jerry Jeudy was the only legitimate receiving threat, and even he underperformed. The Browns finished dead last in EPA lost on turnovers, meaning they were constantly putting themselves in terrible field position. The quarterback situation was a revolving door of mediocrity. What Rees did accomplish, according to some evaluators, was developing Shedeur Sanders during his 7-start sample size. Sanders went 2-4 as a starter, but he showed flashes of competence. He led a game-winning drive in Week 18 against Cincinnati. Former NFL quarterback Chase Daniel said Sanders made major strides under Rees's coaching. Multiple draft analysts noted that Sanders looked more comfortable in the pocket and made better pre-snap reads as the season progressed. If you squint really hard and ignore all the losing, you can maybe see an argument that Rees helped a 5th-round rookie quarterback develop despite working with the worst supporting cast in football. And if that's true, maybe he deserves a shot to be the head coach and build the entire offense around his vision with proper resources. But here's the counter-argument that makes the Browns' potential decision so insane. Promoting your worst offensive coordinator to head coach is organizational malpractice. It's the Freddie Kitchens disaster all over again. In 2019, the Browns promoted Kitchens from offensive coordinator to head coach after he had success with Baker Mayfield for half a season. The result? An absolute catastrophe. Kitchens went 6-10, the offense regressed, the team was a laughingstock, and he was fired after 1 year. Now the Browns want to do it again? They want to promote an offensive coordinator whose unit was worse than Kitchens ever was. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And let's be clear about something. Nick Saban's endorsement is powerful, but it's not infallible. Saban has had assistants fail in the NFL before. Lane Kiffin was his offensive coordinator at Alabama and flamed out as an NFL head coach with the Oakland Raiders. Butch Jones coordinated Alabama's offense for 1 season and never got another major opportunity. Even Saban himself struggled as an NFL head coach with the Miami Dolphins, going 15-17 before returning to college football. The NFL is a completely different animal than college football. What works in Tuscaloosa doesn't always translate to Cleveland. And promoting a 33-year-old with 0 head coaching experience at any level, whose only NFL coordinator experience resulted in the worst offense in the league, is a massive risk. It's the kind of risk that gets general managers fired and sets franchises back years. But here's where it gets even more complicated. If the Browns don't promote Rees, they're going to lose him, and they know it. Multiple college programs are circling, waiting to offer him a head coaching job. NFL teams will try to poach him as an offensive coordinator. If Cleveland fires Stefanski and brings in a new head coach like Mike Vrabel or Ben Johnson, that coach is going to want to bring in his own staff. Rees will be out, and the Browns will lose the one coach who has the coaching pedigree and developmental skills to potentially fix their quarterback situation. So Cleveland is stuck between two terrible options: promote Rees and risk another Freddie Kitchens disaster where an unproven coordinator gets overwhelmed by the head coaching responsibilities, or conduct a traditional coaching search and lose Rees entirely, potentially watching him succeed somewhere else while the Browns continue their cycle of dysfunction.
And all of this is happening while Shedeur Sanders sits in limbo, not knowing if he's the quarterback of the future or just a placeholder until Cleveland drafts Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore in the 2026 draft. Sanders showed enough in his 7 starts to warrant another shot, but the Browns are picking 6th overall, low enough that they might miss out on the elite quarterback prospects, but high enough that they could trade up if they're willing to give up draft capital. If they promote Rees, the assumption is they're committing to Sanders. Rees developed him, knows his strengths and weaknesses, and has a vision for how to build an offense around him. Promoting Rees essentially means saying, we believe in Shedeur Sanders as our quarterback of the future. But if they hire an external head coach like Aaron Glenn or Ben Johnson, that new coach is going to want his quarterback, not the one that the previous regime drafted. That probably means the Browns trade up for Mendoza or Moore, draft a receiver like Jordan Tyson at pick 6, and move on from Sanders entirely. The decision about Tommy Rees is actually a decision about the entire future direction of the franchise, and it's all being driven by one man who doesn't even work for the Cleveland Browns, Nick Saban. His endorsement of Rees is the single most important factor in this entire equation. Without Saban's recommendation, there's zero chance the Browns even consider promoting the coordinator whose offense was dead last in the league. But with Saban's endorsement, suddenly it's a legitimate possibility that's being seriously discussed by people inside the organization. And you know what makes this even more Browns? Kevin Stefanski, who's reportedly getting fired despite being a 2-time NFL Coach of the Year, despite going out with back-to-back division wins, despite doing more for this franchise than any coach since Bill Belichick was in Cleveland, won't stay unemployed for long. ESPN's Adam Schefter reported that Stefanski will be one of the most sought-after candidates in this coaching cycle. The New York Giants, Tennessee Titans, and potentially even teams like Green Bay or Jacksonville could pursue him. So, the Browns will fire Stefanski, watch him get hired by another team within days, and then promote the coordinator whose offense was the worst in football. And when that coordinator inevitably struggles because he's 33 years old with 0 head coaching experience, trying to fix one of the most dysfunctional franchises in sports, Cleveland will fire him in 2 years and start the whole process over again. This is the Cleveland Browns in 2026, a franchise where Nick Saban's endorsement carries more weight than actual results, where the worst offense in football is somehow a selling point for promotion instead of grounds for termination, where a 2-time Coach of the Year gets fired and his replacement is the coordinator who presided over the team's biggest offensive failure in recent history. The most Browns thing that could possibly happen would be for them to promote Tommy Rees, watch Kevin Stefanski go to the Giants and immediately turn them into a playoff team, see Rees struggle for 2 years and get fired, and then watch Rees go back to college football and become a successful head coach somewhere else. Everyone would succeed except the Browns, who would be left picking up the pieces of yet another failed organizational decision. But here's the thing, despite all the dysfunction, despite all the terrible optics, despite the fact that promoting the worst offensive coordinator in football seems like absolute insanity, there's a small chance, a tiny chance that the Browns might actually be right about this. Maybe Tommy Rees really is a coaching savant who was working with impossible circumstances in 2026. Maybe he really can develop Shedeur Sanders into a franchise quarterback. Maybe he really is the next Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan,
a young offensive genius who just needs the right opportunity and the right resources to show what he can do. Or, maybe, more likely, this is just another chapter in the never-ending story of Cleveland Browns dysfunction, where good coaches get fired, bad decisions get made, and the cycle continues year after year with no end in sight. The decision will be made in the coming weeks. The Browns will either promote Tommy Rees and bet everything on Nick Saban's endorsement being correct, or they'll conduct a traditional head coaching search and risk losing Rees to another team. Either way, this offseason is going to be chaotic, controversial, and thoroughly Cleveland Browns. And we'll be here to cover every single insane moment of it.